Hello friends, for today's video we're going to be doing something quite different from what I typically do. A lot of you know I hold very strongly to the principle of I try to avoid as much as possible seeing other people's thoughts, whether in a casual way or a more formal way in a review. I, regardless, try to avoid seeing other people's thoughts about books before I've had a chance to both read them, and especially though before I've had a chance to review them. And I will explain in a second, for those that haven't heard the reasoning why, I'll explain the why to start. And then we'll get into what the core of this video is, which is that I purposefully broke that rule for myself just to see how quickly I fell into the very traps that I want to avoid by having this principle. And it was immediate. I immediately found myself not engaging with the book, even though I'd already read it. But my thought process about the book and the way that I kind of sit in the story and process my feelings about something, it immediately shifted to just kind of almost being combative about what other people think about the book. And that is not ever how I want to approach books. But I purposefully did this because I wanted to kind of experiment and see how quickly I fell into having thoughts that weren't necessarily my own, but were rather reactive, which is not what I want when I check things out. I think there is a difference in checking out reviews to kind of inform yourself of like, what's this book about? What do people think? Is this something I want to spend my time and money on? Because time and money is very limited for a lot of people. And so I absolutely think that reviews are important. I'm not trying to disregard that. But getting into the why I typically don't look at reviews before I've had a chance to review things, I think a really significant part of this is that because this is what I do for work and because I make money, I want to ensure I am only making money off of my own thoughts and opinions as much as possible. Obviously, sometimes we're having conversations or I'm engaging with, some of you have volunteered your thoughts on things, and then I am engaging with those thoughts and opinions. And I think that there's something different about having a conversational style versus I have sort of absorbed, whether intentionally or unintentionally so, other people's opinions, and then I am making money off of somebody else's well thought out reviews of a work, and that I didn't actually put in. I hate the idea that I wouldn't have put in the time and effort into analyzing a work of fiction, being critical about it, about the pacing, the storytelling, the themes, the writing style, the authorial voice. I hate the idea that I would just kind of, again, either unintentionally or intentionally so, absorb somebody else's hard work, and then I would profit off of that. I think that's wrong. And it's so much so that even when it comes to sharing fan art for books and other such things, because I love artists and I love supporting artists and buying their prints, following them, sharing their art, like if you're like, check this person out, I really like doing that. That said, I won't even have somebody's art on my channel for videos that are monetized without asking their permission first, which tech companies, it's not that hard. Point is, I really, really, really hate the idea of any kind of intellectual plagiarism. I don't want to engage in it. I don't want to take somebody else's thoughts and opinions, but even more so than that, I shouldn't say more so, but another part of this is that I think that, and this is potentially going to be a whole other video discussion on a different day, but I kind of think that we don't realize how much our opinions are influenced by other people's opinions. And we're all so plugged into the internet these days that I kind of feel like we have no awareness. Like we can't even tell just how much we're influenced by other people's opinions because we're so plugged in. So I like to essentially disengage. And then I go into a book knowing hardly anything about it. I might know like the premise and that kind of thing, but I don't know really people's thoughts and opinions and also a thorough analysis of these books that I'm picking up. I go into them, I experience them, I let you know about them in as much as possible a way where you can determine for yourself if it sounds like something you would like or not like. Sometimes I do spoiler discussions. Those are kind of more for people that have read the book, although I know there's that rare individual that actually feels like spoilers help them determine if they want to pick something up, which I think that's just a very different way your brain is wired than mine. That's cool. That's cool that there's different ways that things work for people. But point is, I just find that we don't realize how many of our own opinions sometimes are not really our own opinions. In the last few years, by sort of detaching myself and approaching reviews in this style, I had in my head like, oh, I have kind of trained myself to not fall into the trap of I just take in everybody else's thoughts and I am only really having thoughts in association and in reaction to those thoughts. I think I've done enough where I'm like, I can look at reviews. Let's see what happens if I look at reviews before I've reviewed something. And immediately I determine like, no, I can't do this. And this could be more of a me thing. I think there are some people that are like me as well though. I get obsessive. I see somebody else's thoughts and I kind of have this thing where it's like, well, now I want to talk about this with this person. Like, what do they mean about this though? Because like, that's not true. And then like, you kind of get into this headspace of like, but no. And I've seen this happen in comment section before too. And I've felt it before when somebody's saying something about a book and you're like, nah, and you want to kind of push back on that. And I kind of found myself immediately doing that. And I'm like, I haven't even reviewed the book. I haven't talked about the book. And now my head is just, there's all these thoughts swirling around that are a response to other things I've seen said about this book that I don't really agree with, or maybe I'm like, I don't know if that's what happened though. So I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to illustrate how easily, because I like wrote out a bunch of things. I know, and I want to make clear, I know some people are actually going to be like, I kind of like this style though. I kind of like the reaction to, because it maybe feels more conversational. Like some people say this, here's how I feel. But I also don't want to get into the practice of feeling as though and I'm not even trying to do this today either, but I don't want to get into the practice of making it seem as though I'm saying other people read things wrong. I don't like that. I don't like when people imply that about other people's reading. And so it's not necessarily what I'm going to do today. I had a book that I felt, I would say, neutral to positive toward. And I thought that would be the perfect book to do this experiment with, because if I really love something, I'm going to be way too combative. And if I really hate something, I'm going to be like, yeah, exactly, this book's stupid. And I didn't want to necessarily be leaning one way or the other. Obviously, I'm leaning a little bit more toward I liked it. So then some of the negative things I've seen about it, I have thoughts on. But it was more of like a neutral adjacent book. And the book would be A Winter's Promise. I will go more in depth about the book itself when I do my steampunk video, which is coming, I promise. But I'm reading so many books for that. And I will have a little asterisk when I talk about this book in that video of like that I did this for this book. But I do want to add one more thing before getting into the specifics. I also think, because I do this for work, I think most people that engage with seeing other people's thoughts as they are reading or before they've even read a book, while I think more often than not, I don't think they're purposefully trying to tell people what they want to hear. I think some people do know, and then they are trying to tell people what they want to hear because they know it will make people like them more, and then it will make them more money. And I think most people aren't doing that purposefully. I think a lot of people fall in the middle where they don't think they're doing it on purpose, but like they kind of can't help it because they don't realize they're doing it. And then there are people that I'm like, you just kind of conveniently love every single thing that your specific audience happens to think is great, and every new thing you pick up that's recommended to you by your audience you happen to think is great. And you also happen to be able to analyze all the things that the fandom has already talked about and discussed at length. You just kind of, these are just all your original thoughts. I don't really think so. So yeah, I just never want to, I've seen it happen. I don't really want to be a part of that at all. And so this principle I hold to is like a rejection of that. I think, again, some people it's like accidental, or some people probably are really good at seeing other people's thoughts and they're like, yeah, I can totally separate, and they really can. I'm not one of those people. I know I'm not. I know I see other people's thoughts and I focus too much on that. So that's what we're kind of illustrating today. Back to A Winter's Promise though. I'm going to go through some things I saw, and then also the way that I just hyper fixated on these things. And I'm not even going to really tell you too much about the book. I will tell you things about the book that relate to these things. But part of why I'm purposely not doing like a review in this video for this book is to showcase how much I immediately start to distance myself from what's the book about, the character development, the plot progression. I've completely, in my brain, forgotten, not literally, but it's like I'm not focused on those things. I'm focused on these other things. And I think it's a bad practice to get into, because then you're not actually focusing on the things that are helpful to people that might want to pick the book up. So on that note, what I'm going to do is go through in kind of like a bullet point chapter fashion, go through various different things that people I saw say about the book and my thoughts about the things that were said, and then we'll conclude. And I will say I'm going to go in order of, I can kind of see where people are coming from here all the way to I don't necessarily agree with this. And on that note, let's jump in. So to start, the first point that I saw a few different people articulate was that the main character in this book, she has some powers and she just never uses them. So they felt like they were frustrated with this character because it's like, you gave her these powers and then why did you bother giving her these powers? She doesn't use them. And in the book, the character has the ability to read the history of objects, and not just the objects themselves, but also the feelings of the people as they handled those objects. And then the other ability she has the ability to travel through mirrors. And she is in, for a lot of the book, a setting she doesn't want to be in. She is somewhat trapped and her circumstances are terrible. So when I saw people saying she never uses her powers, I thought, yes, she does. That was kind of my reaction. I do agree she does not use them as much as maybe she could, given those are some pretty cool powers. But she either doesn't really use them because of things that I feel like the book established, or she doesn't really use them because of the stakes involved. The whole idea of like traveling through mirrors, you'd be like, why don't you travel through mirrors to escape this horrible situation you're in? She tries. She does try to travel through mirrors to escape the horrible situation she's in. And then the setting is so dangerous that she realizes she's in more danger with where she went than where she was before. So then when she returns, she does kind of have a like Cinderella situation where she gets locked in her room and she's mistreated by almost like a stepmother-like character. She gets mistreated severely, but also the repercussions of what could have happened when she left and she did use her powers were so bad that it's like, wow, okay, this is why I can't use them. So I felt like that made sense. And it doesn't change the fact that like she could have tried, you know, the character in this book does not have the most amount of obvious agency. She's kind of just like sitting around as things are happening to her, and I completely understand feeling frustrated at, it's like, well, you have some things at your disposal, even though something bad happened or even worse things could have happened the first time that you tried to escape or get more information. You gotta try again. You know, I get that feeling, absolutely. And I think that the book could have done more to not have her just be like, oh no, I'm like just stuck here. But she does use them. She does use her powers sometimes. As for the history of the objects, because that certainly would give her more information in the area that she's in, it established pretty early, although I think this point could have been reiterated more, that she doesn't do it because it's kind of a very, very sacred thing to do, and because she reads the history, not just of the object, but the emotions of the people. She has to ask their permission before she does this. So I feel like there was kind of like a world building thing. I do feel like it was almost plot convenience crutch. I think that's a fair statement, certainly. But this is what I mean by like, there's like this reaction of like, yeah, no, so those use our powers. Now moving on to the second thing, which is gonna seem like surprising that this is not at the end of like the most extreme parts of this, but the idea that there's incest in this book. I think I know what people are referring to. There's a couple different things. So the setting is really quite fascinating. The idea is that there was some kind of, you assume anyway, there's some kind of like apocalyptic event that caused the world to fracture. And then people are living on these floating islands, so to speak. And over time, these floating islands have their own, they almost seem like stuck in different time periods. So it's almost like different worlds from one island to the next. And they have their own settings with their own cultures and governments and other such things. And in this particular area, many of the people that live where our main character is originally from, they don't necessarily often marry outside of the island. There's like these ancestor spirits. They're almost like the origin of each island. So our characters on this island refer to people that have powers associated with this ancestor spirit as cousins. They, at one point, the main character at the beginning of the story is, it's likely she's going to be married off, and she's probably going to be married off to somebody from a different landmass. She's talking to a family member and they tell her like, well, you had the opportunity, like you could have married one of your cousins and now you're going to have to marry this other person. And they don't literally mean cousins. They mean like other people on this island. But I absolutely can see why it was like, wait, her cousin. I also was a little confused though, because this isn't like a defense of marrying your cousin, just to be clear. But in a lot of fantasy, especially ones that are set in historical settings, there is a fair amount of like marrying people that you're like, aren't they kind of related though? Kind of a common thing. Not that we shouldn't be grossed out by it, just to be really clear. But I was kind of surprised that a fair amount of people were like, this is incest. Because I'm like, I don't think they're literally cousins though. The other thing that people could be talking about is that in the other area that our character ends up on, the place where her betrothed lives, there's a woman who it would seem is pregnant with ancestor spirit's child. And I could see being grossed out by that. But also even the character is kind of like, what? You're pregnant with the ancestor spirit's child? Why? So that one I can kind of see. The next one is something that I can both see what people are saying, but then maybe I kind of disagree. And it's the idea that the book there's supposed to be a matriarchy, so thus why is it still such a misogynistic, patriarchal leaning society, and then also why are all the women so terrible? So there's two parts to this. The very first place that our main character is from is a matriarchy. That is established very clearly. I took it as her area was a matriarchy, not the place that she goes for and is in for most of the book. So when she goes to this other place, her betrothed, where he lives, I don't think was a matriarchy. And the way that I saw some people talking about the book, I was a little confused because they talked about it, I think, as though they thought it was supposed to be a matriarchy in this other place. And that's when I was like, I don't think so. And I genuinely was like, did I, when you have that feeling, you're like, did I read something wrong? But I went back and looked and I'm like, I think it's like the place she lives in is a matriarchy. And then where he's from is not necessarily. So that's part of it. But then this goes hand in hand with the idea of like all the women are terrible. It's very misogynistic. I don't disagree that pretty much every woman in the story is terrible, but so is basically every man. So I think I was a little surprised that it was like highlighting the way that the women were terrible, because I think I can understand some of the ways that women talk about other women, or that the men talk about women, or their views toward how women should be. It was gendered from one place to the next. I think there were specifics. Like there's a character at one point who his sisters are dressed a certain way and he's like, no, I need them covered head to toe, basically, even though he's a scoundrel. And I can understand why people would be like, how come he gets to do stuff and the girls? But the point is, I do kind of think that the way that I saw it being discussed, I was like, I mean, yeah, everybody sucks. The book, the place that she goes to, everybody is terrible. Everybody. There's not like basically anybody that our character interacts with who I'm like, oh, they're nice. No, everybody's awful. And where she's from, people aren't great. And this is the part that I could kind of see some people being confused by. The place that she is from is a matriarchy, but they also, it seems like, have these roles of like, you're going to marry somebody because it is like a woman's role to get married and have. So I can see why some people would be like, what? That feels like a little counterintuitive to the idea. But it is still pretty clear that even though they seem to have this idea that that is a significant thing, our character even has a line, you honor your parents by having children. There's kind of a line, something like that. But you also see women make the decisions in her world or the place that she's from. And her father hardly has any of his own thoughts and opinions. He just kind of like quietly barely talks because the mom rules the house. But I also think there's this confusion of like, why is she being married off? But I actually think that's confusion throughout the story. There seems to be a purpose for why they're marrying her off to this person from this other place. And then the last point, I don't agree with this. And that is that basically our main character is not like other girls. And their reasoning is basically because she has a disability. I saw a number of people that are like, oh, look, our main character's not like other girls because she's clumsy and her immune system sucks and she's always sneezing and like dropping stuff. And this gets explained very early and reiterated later. So this is the one that I'm the most like, huh? Because the idea of being able to travel through mirrors, it's not just this very inherent ability our character has as a result of living in this area with a specific kind of magic. She had to practice it a lot. And at one point she got stuck. So she was like partially going through a mirror and she was still in another one because she obviously uses these mirrors to sort of transport herself into different places. So she got stuck. And because she got stuck and she was stuck for a very long amount of time, once she finally got through, injury you could call it, caused a slight disconnect sometimes between when she has a thought like, I'm going to reach for this cup or I'm going to pick something up. Sometimes there is a slight disconnect between the thought of doing that thing and then the actual response from her body, and as a result she knocks things over or she drops things, and she doesn't essentially always have complete control over her movements. And it also seems to have maybe also impacted her immune system because she does get sick very easily and she's kind of seen as very weak in general. And I actually read that, and my take was, even though the source of what caused this was fantasy leaning and was magical in origin, I definitely think there are a lot of people out there that have had some kind of injury, or maybe they were even born with something that caused something similar to what the end result was for our character. And so I really thought it was kind of cool to have this character that essentially had a disability, and that she is able to be resilient despite all the things that people see as quote unquote weak about her. And it made me a little sad to see this kind of like just reduced to like, oh look, she's not like other girls because she sneezes a lot and then she knocks stuff over. And I was like, I feel like it was a little, I feel like there's a little more substance than just that. She does sneeze a lot and her nose is always runny and she does break a lot of stuff. I know it happens, but I was a little bummed because I really appreciated that about this character, and I thought there were people out there that probably could relate, and they don't really get to see themselves in characters very often that are like her, and so I was a little bummed that it got seen that way. But the summary now of all of these things. I don't know if you came away from this with any idea, really, like maybe you caught bits and pieces when I was providing context, but I don't really feel like I revealed to you important information about whether or not this is going to be the book for you or not. It felt like it was very reactionary. It felt like it was argumentative. It felt like it was dismissing other people's takes, which I don't mean at all. It was more so I was expressing when I maybe disagreed with something, not because they're wrong for having these thoughts or opinions, or because even if there is a justification for why things are the way they are, people are certainly still allowed to be annoyed by things or feel like things could have been played out differently, or that you made it this way for plot convenience. I think all of that is true. But I just found myself, even though this was like neutral, slightly leaning positive, wasn't like a diehard, this is my favorite, I will hear no slander. It wasn't even that kind of book. And I still found myself wanting to respond to these specifics as opposed to illustrating all the things about this book that I think are worth knowing, that I think will let you know whether it's something for you, the creativity behind it. There's just so many things that I found myself not focusing on as much. And I thought that even though I say fairly often, I don't like looking at reviews before I've reviewed a book, or I don't like looking at reviews before I've picked up a book, and I say that and I kind of give a little bit of an explanation, I felt like maybe this little experiment would not only explain why, but it would sort of reaffirm to myself like, oh yeah, this is why I have this principle, because I am somebody that gets too obsessive about what I see being said, and I want to respond to that rather than deliver information that I think is actually important and relevant. So maybe this was maybe you liked this. Maybe you're like, I kind of like seeing the responses to things that get said. I don't mind, reacting to negative opinions in a way for books I like, or positive opinions for books I don't like. I don't mind doing that when it's a very established, like formal, that's clearly what's happening. But I just really don't like when it feels as though people are not forthcoming with where their thoughts and opinions are actually originating from. So anyway, this is a little experiment that I thought I would fill you in on, and the steampunk video is coming, and maybe someday I'll do a video that goes more in depth about like, do any of us have any of our own opinions anymore? Maybe I'll do a video about that in the future. But anyway, if you're interested in A Winter's Promise, I'll have it linked in the description bar, even though I feel like you don't know a whole lot about it. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.